Part 1. The Innovator. Summer 1890. In the evening you hear a single gunshot. The demented Dutch misanthrope who just moved in has shot himself. He meant nothing to you, you never learned his name, and soon he will fade from the memories of every man, woman, and child that have ever met him. The man was a painter, yet you never saw or heard of his work being displayed, sold, or appreciated. His name was Vincent van Gogh, the most prolific painter of the past several centuries. It seems an odd contradiction, the character of Vincent van Gogh. How can someone both be so utterly unremarkable in their time, yet be one of the few painters to enter the mainstream in modern times? Hell, he's probably the reason why the whole cliche of the starving, tortured artist exists. The contradiction is present in his body of work as well. Van Gogh was manically depressed and known to have a penchant for self-mutilation. He famously severed his own ear and painted his magnum opus Starry Night in an asylum. Yet if you look at his magnum opus, or any of his paintings, they don't exactly read like someone who's depressed. They are vivid, colorful, and full of life. An artist's work is typically a reflection of the self, but it's difficult to draw a simple line between Van Gogh and the aesthetics of his work. However, somewhere, he is in there. To turn the agony of your own mind into such a joyous representation of life is quite beautiful.
I put my heart and my soul into my work, and have lost my mind in the process. Vincent van Gogh, in a letter to Theo van Gogh.
Legacy and innovation is a tricky relationship. A common belief in tech and business is that the person who makes an innovation is rarely the one who profits off of it or is known for it. Think Nikola Tesla as a prime example of this. The risk exists in art as well. The line between genius and foolishness is often difficult to balance. Van Gogh, simply put, was ahead of his time. The legacy that has followed him after death is self-explanatory. Almost everybody knows his name. With hindsight, the value of his artistic contributions are incalculable. Yet when he lived, the only person that ever bought his paintings was his own brother. The weight of his perceived failures weakened his already shattered mental state. Why was Van Gogh only relevant after death? The common belief that Van Gogh's work was disliked is a little misleading. It would be more accurate to say he was simply dismissed. His style was entirely new, and in the balancing act of genius and foolishness, he fell on the wrong side and was simply not fashionable. Why is this the case? What part of Van Gogh's body of work was so bold that it alienated the people of his time? For so long, artists sought to paint what they saw precisely as they saw them. To oversimplify things a little, ever since the Renaissance, artists have been trying to paint realistically. Of course, this explanation is a little crude. For example, the Baroque and Romanticism movements vary greatly in subjects and aesthetic tastes, though at their core still limited to the rules and regulations of reality. This came to a peak in the mid-1800s with the Realism movement, clearly very technically impressive, although unless the subject is particularly captivating, it can be really hard to really connect with the piece. It doesn't make me feel much, it can be a little boring. Especially as photography became more refined, the value of realism in painting became more questionable. Impressionism, a movement in which painters would work outside a studio setting and depict the momentary sensation of being in a scene rather than its accuracy, was at the time controversial. The even more controversial movement, post-impressionism, was a reaction to this. They wanted to extend its potential and reject the limitations of impressionism, commonly done by pushing against the concern for a naturalistic depiction of light and color. Put yourself in the head of a late 19th century farmer. Something produced by either of these movements would look like nothing you've ever seen before. To many, it was even offensive. It was in this post-impressionist framework that Van Gogh worked. Words are one thing, but art should really speak for itself visually. You'll get the difference. Here's a landscape painted in a realistic style. You know, this generally looks the way things are supposed to look. It looks fantastic. This is an impressionist take on a similar sort of landscape. You can really perceive the individual brushstrokes, you can feel the artist's physical hand. And remember, this is supposed to kind of get the feel of what it was like to be there in the moment. So the little town off in the distance is very out of focus. It means nothing compared to the beauty of how the light reflects off the sky and nature. For the Impressionism piece, light and color were still more or less in line with reality, even though they are exaggerated. When we move to Post-Impressionism, we can see these really pushed as far as possible. You still see the individual strokes like in Impressionism, but look at those colors. So fucking vivid, dude. Realism captured it as it is. Impressionism understood the momentary things that happen only when you can be there. Post-impressionism understands the feelings of what it's like to view a place like this. and captures that on canvas. Van Gogh's story is a poignant reminder of the often delayed recognition of true innovation. It underscores how societal norms and expectations can obscure the brilliance of pioneering work, leaving the recognition and appreciation of such genius to future generations. His legacy, however, is undeniable, and his influence on art is immeasurable, proving that true innovation, though not always immediately recognized, will eventually find its rightful place in history. However, one must ask, if not for the tale of his untimely death, would his work still have made an impact? Unfortunately, his legacy is just as defined by his suicide as it is his art. The intrigue around the circumstances of his death is what attracted collectors, creating a legacy he could never know, an enterprise he will never own. Part 2. The Virtuoso. It is the fall of 2022, and the most talented man alive has died. At the age of only 47, Jung Gi was killed by a heart attack. Kim has a very different relationship with death and legacy than someone like Van Gogh. Van Gogh was a genius who was ahead of his time, and as a result would only be recognized post-mortem. In contrast, Kim's legacy was cast in stone well before his death. I was not exaggerating when I called him the most talented man alive. Kim has a 4070 installed in his brain. Quickly, if you can, draw a car. Most people, unless they are looking at one or have practiced it extensively, might come up with something like this. In the time it took you to do this, Kim would show you this. A perfect car, in a difficult perspective, with dynamic posing, drawn entirely in ink, without a sketch, no reference, no erasing. Surely he's cheating. Different angle, easy. New subject, easy. Different angle again, easy. 5-point perspective, well that's just a napkin doodle. Seriously, how could this be possible? Jung Gi has an incredible visual memory. The car he drew earlier was something he could visualize at his mind's eye, freely interact with, understand it. Almost as if his subconscious was operating in a no-clip mode. He was so proficient with this method he would often draw a mural on the spot in front of a live audience. Ironically, most artists can only ever attain the status of immortality through death. There is an unhealthy obsession with being remembered posthumously. Legacy is maybe sought after with such fervor because of stories like Van Gogh, who so many aspiring artists forget is a tragedy. Kim is a needed reminder that our legacies can begin while we are still breathing, being universally praised and demonstrating technical skills more comparable to a supercomputer than a person. Speaking personally, Jung Gi was one of my single largest sources of inspiration when I was maturing as an artist. When I was in high school, Michelle Obama was on a speaking tour to promote her new book. I went to the convention center that day, and they handed out a notebook and a pen. This is my prized Obama book. I didn't pay attention to a word that was being said. I felt the interviewer was doing a bad job. I had a ballpoint pen and lined paper. Because of the crudeness of the tools and the absurdism of the situation, I knew nobody could judge what I was doing. It was a sandbox to make what I wanted, with no pressure, no eraser, no planning, just move. Just as Jung Gi has. I think this is the real impact behind Jung Gi's work, his ability to inspire. Like how shortly after Roger Bannister ran at the first 4-minute mile, which was previously thought to be impossible, everybody was doing it. We have now seen a person shatter our expectations of what just a regular guy is able to achieve. While his death is certainly a tragedy, it also left something of a power vacuum. When I said Kim was the most talented artist alive, I fully believed it. And to most people who knew about him, that is his legacy. So like Roger Bannister, the bar has been raised. We now know what is possible. Without a doubt, someone will rise to that level. It could be anyone. There's a short time where I was foolish enough to think it could be me. That insane potential, an absolute marvel of a mind. The idea was seductive. It wasn't me. But it could be you. Part 3. The Apocalypse. Those were stories from two of the most famous, most capable artists to ever live. But even if an artist's life isn't necessarily an interesting story, their work almost always is. Get ready, brace yourself, I'm gonna say the pretentious thing. Whether it's a drawing or a painting, whatever people make will inherently have a little bit of a humanity in them, a soul. Vivid landscapes through the lens of a shattered mind, an unrivaled visual memory. Of course, you're gonna see the life that is in the work of geniuses, but it's still there even in pieces that aren't visually appealing in a conventional sense. I've talked about my friend Matt a few times on my channel. He's the one who encouraged me to start making videos. It's all his fault, and now you know who to blame. Recently, he tried to pick up drawing. This is one of his very early attempts, a portrait. Obviously, it's a little rough, but I really liked it, and I don't think he believed me when I told him that. I like that you can ascertain a lot of what he was thinking while sketching this. He was really insecure about drawing ears, so he really went in on those. Super bold lines compared to everything else, as well as a more rendered anatomy. It almost looks like the ear was sculpted rather than drawn and then grafted onto the head. It's so large relative to the rest of the face, almost like that is what he started with. So you can really feel the ear was where the enthusiasm is, and at the same time, sense the insecurity behind it. The anatomy isn't technically accurate, but as I hope we've established by now, that really doesn't matter. It still creates an interesting image, which has something to say for itself. Even though a lot of this could be categorized as a mistake, the drawing itself was still made by a human. Every little pencil stroke had a reason to exist. It was a conscious decision, inherently giving them meaning.
It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to paint like a child. Pablo Picasso.
This is Shad, from the Shadiversity YouTube channel. He's not an artist, and he's not dead. Yet. But he still represents something of a change in tide, a legacy unlike the others we've covered, a more sinister meaning of the death of an artist. He is one of the few very public advocates for AI-generated art. Sidestepping some of the morally dubious implications of just how AI tools work, the work they produce is just utterly uninterested and soulless. By definition, AI art is devoid of that beautiful human intentionality that I enjoy so much. In Shad's video, A Love Letter to AI Art, he outlines why AI is great and how he is a really good artist. I think he means to show how generating AI art is laborious and requires an artistic eye by tweaking what the AI gave him and giving it back to regenerate. But all he manages to do is embarrass himself by creating a really uncanny and bland image.
But I paused because there was something that I saw in this image that I had to go back to. And this is where applying artistic talent is really important. You might not see what I see in this image, but I see potential for a brilliant pose and composition here.
Apparently, his artistic eye failed to see how her head is twice as large as it should be, and despite being behind her, the sun is lighting her front. It's really too bad. At the start of his video, he shows some of his earlier traditional work, and while obviously amateur, he sometimes makes fun geometric abstractions of anatomy. But if this was always his intention, to render an uncanny reality, then I'm sorry, you failed. You're a bad artist, and you probably always have been. Your new process amounts to giving your tools all of the control, then pasting your wife's face over top. It's lazy, uninspiring, and frankly, a little weird. AI isn't the death of art because of one overconfident poser. There are a lot of people on this end of the Dunning-Kruger graph. What it really comes down to is thievery. As it currently stands, AI isn't all that capable of making good art. Art isn't even accurate. It is utterly devoid of anything I value, but for lack of a better word. It is, however, capable of working very quickly. The internet is already significantly less usable than it once was. Image searching almost anything will yield mostly AI-generated images. The power to flood Google servers like this is exactly the high-efficiency, low-cost option that big business loves. It doesn't really matter how good a piece of concept art is, for example. If you can mass-produce hundreds of thousands of that work, it's worth doing financially. In this technology's infancy, it's already displaced many illustrators and designers. That's not to mention contract and gig workers who make their living off of commissions. Well, at least commission artists still have their own unique style and brand, which will hopefully continue to give them a unique niche in the market. Wait, how are all these AIs trained again? Would you like to personally reap the rewards of Alex Ross's decades of work to perfect his painterly style for your furry fan art without compensating him for his work? With one sentence and a button press, you can do just that! Tech like Stable Diffusion or Midjourney trained on millions of trademarked unlicensed images to try and approximate their styles just for you. The one advertisable skill of hundreds of artists like Alex Ross has effectively been stolen. Yay! What an exciting time we live in. I had to make an open art account for this joke, and I feel a little dirty now. A tagline for a lot of pro-AI groups is that AI will democratize art, similar to how cheaper cameras and eventually phone cameras made photography more accessible. The difference being that the core competencies which make a good photographer and what photographers value remain the same. It was just cheaper to practice these skill sets. Really, if anything democratized art, it was the manufacturing of cheaper art supplies, and what are essentially all-in-one devices like drawing tablets. Skills like anatomy, composition, and color theory exist here. I don't know what you would call this. An assortment of buzzwords and brackets to denote importance. Optimistically, I had hoped prompt generation would be like poetry, a writer vividly describing a scene, and the AI captures the essence, the soul of your text. But looking at this, there's no soul here. No human expression, it's all very cold, mechanical. Currently, artists are losing the financial battle. If most of the jobs go away and the commission well dries, there will naturally be less artists. And in a sea with millions of manufactured images every minute, artists will soon lose the cultural battle as well. In this video, we talked a lot about the lives and legacy of very impressive, influential people, how new human experiences led to innovations and new perceptions in art, a completely new stylistic approach, and a technical prowess so great it defies reason. I'm stressing this so much because the era of the artist or auteur is coming to an end, much sooner than we realize. This technology is very much in its infancy, yet, in its most unrefined form, it's destabilized the landscape to the point where many can't find work, and even more can't find the motivation to create anything anymore. I fear that these legacies we discussed today could be among the last ever, that we are entering a cultural dark age brought about by ill-considered technologies, that beyond any one individual, this really could be the death of the artist. Thanks for watching. This video is dedicated not just to the memories of Jung Gi and Vincent van Gogh, but to all dreamers and creators, both known and unknown, to history. A special thanks to my friend, Matthew Miranda, for giving me the inspiration to dream myself, and Adrian Gogh for writing the voiceovers and giving a distraction for my voice. Thank you.